In the summer of 1944, as the war in Europe tilted steadily against Germany, a new sound began to haunt the skies over the English Channel. A low mechanical growl, followed by a strange, uneven pulse, like the heartbeat of some crude metal creature drifting through the night. It was the sound of the V-1 flying bomb, the first of Hitler's vengeance weapons, and the beginning of a campaign designed not to defeat the British Army, but to break the spirit of an entire nation. The German High Command called the V-1 a miracle weapon, a technological triumph born from desperation, a pilotless aircraft driven by a pulse jet engine, simple, cheap, and capable of being launched in vast numbers from ramps scattered across the coast of occupied France. The engineers who built it believed they had created something unstoppable. The V-1 flew at more than 600 kilometers per hour, low enough to dodge many early radar sets, fast enough to slip past British anti-aircraft guns, and deadly enough that a single hit could obliterate an entire city block. When the first V-1s lifted off from Pas-de-Calais, their engines sputtering and roaring as they raced into the dark sky, even the German launch crews felt a chill. The weapon looked almost alive, a black metal tube with short wings and a glowing exhaust coughing blue and orange flames into the night sky. And London was its target. That summer, the British capital had endured years of bombings and hardship, yet the V-1 brought a new kind of terror. Its approach was announced by its unmistakable drone, a grinding howl that echoed across the rooftops as it streaked overhead. People learned to listen for the moment the engine cut out, because when the sound stopped, it meant the bomb was descending, and seconds later, an explosion would rip through streets, homes, and shelters. It was a weapon built as much for psychological destruction as physical devastation. German commanders watched early results with grim satisfaction. The first week seemed to confirm their hopes. Dozens of V-1s crashed into London daily, smashing buildings, igniting fires, killing civilians, and forcing the British government to order evacuations. The engineers who had studied the weapon predicted that British anti-aircraft guns would struggle to hit something flying so fast and so low. Even radar operators found the V-1 difficult to track. Many early radar sets were designed for high-altitude aircraft, not small, fast-moving missiles hugging the treetops. For the engineers at Peenemünde, the V-1 represented a triumph of speed over defense. Their philosophy was simple. Speed would carry the weapon through the wall of fire. Speed would outrun British calculations. Speed would outpace human reaction. And for a brief moment, it seemed they were right. British gunners were frustrated. Their shells burst too far behind the racing missiles. Fighters scrambled to intercept, but the V-1's speed meant only the fastest aircraft could catch them, and even then the margin for error was tiny. The psychological toll grew with every passing night. Wartime diaries recorded fear, exhaustion, and frustration. People huddled in shelters, listening to the engine drone overhead, praying it would not cut out above their neighborhood. The British War Cabinet demanded a solution. Something, anything, to stop the storm of flying bombs. But no traditional method could close the gap between the V-1's speed and the reaction time of human gunners. London stood on the edge of a new kind of war, one where no amount of courage or discipline could protect the city. Only technology could, and that technology had not yet arrived. But far across the Atlantic, the solution was already being prepared in a laboratory where American engineers had quietly been working on something that would change the entire concept of air defense. A radar unlike any used before, capable not only of detecting a target, but locking onto it automatically, tracking its every movement as if guided by an invisible hand. That radar was the SCR 584. While London burned under the first waves of V-1 attacks, the SCR 584 was being unpacked, bolted down, calibrated, and tested at hastily prepared sites across southern England. Its arrival was quiet, unnoticed by the public, unseen by the enemy. But it carried the potential to turn the tide. The men who worked with the radar knew what it could do. They had watched it track tiny test targets in the desert, follow fast-moving aircraft with uncanny precision, and adjust to changes in altitude, speed, and direction without the slightest hesitation. But no one yet knew whether it could stop a weapon designed to outrun everything built before it. As the V-1 onslaught grew heavier, British commanders realized they needed a new way to fight, not faster guns, not better shells, but a new eye in the sky. Something that could see the V-1 despite its speed, despite its low flight path, despite its attempt to hide beneath the radar horizon. And when the first SCR 584 operators arrived at their stations, they found themselves preparing for a battle unlike any fought before. A battle not between soldiers, but between equations, frequencies, mechanical pulses, and the cold logic of machinery. A battle of science, measured in milliseconds. While London civilians watched the horizon at night, waiting for the next drone of a V-1, British and American engineers prepared the SCR 584 for its first trial. Its antenna rising like a gleaming metal dish against the evening sky, its generator humming, its cables twisting across the ground like veins carrying the electricity of a new technological revolution. The German engineers believed the V-1 could outrun guns. They believed speed was the ultimate shield. But what they did not yet understand was that they had entered a new era, an era in which speed meant nothing if radar could see through it, an era in which the defense no longer relied on the eye of a soldier, but on a machine built to think faster than any human ever could. And as the first V-1s approached the range of the SCR 584, the stage was set for a confrontation that would reveal just how wrong the designers of the Vengeance weapon had been. The battle for London was about to change forever, and the engineers who had trusted in the speed of the V-1 were about to learn that no weapon, no matter how fast, can outrun a radar built to track it like it was nothing. The first SCR 584 arrived in England not with fanfare, but with the quiet rumble of transport trucks rolling through muddy roads under low gray clouds. The crews who traveled with it knew they were bringing something extraordinary, but to the British officers waiting at the site, it looked at first like just another piece of American equipment. A large parabolic dish, a squat steel carriage, heavy cables, crates of tools, and a set of instructions thicker than a field manual. There was no hint in its appearance that this machine would soon rewrite the rules of air defense. The SCR 584 was unlike any radar the British had seen before. It was born not on a battlefield, but in the halls of the MIT Radiation Laboratory, built by scientists who spoke more about waveforms and oscillators than tactics or artillery. Its creators had dreamed of a radar that could do what no human could, track a fast-moving object continuously without losing it as it darted across the sky. They called it automatic tracking, auto-track for short. And on that cold English morning in early 1944, the British officers who saw it had no idea how much that single feature would matter. Before long, the skies above them would fill with hundreds of V-1 flying bombs, each one racing toward London with the speed of a fighter and the destructive power of a small aircraft bomb. But for the moment, the British simply watched the Americans unload the equipment and wondered whether this strange machine could do what its operators claimed. The American radar crew began assembling the unit, the dish rising slowly on its mount like a metallic moon. Cables snaked across the muddy ground, connecting the dish to its control cabin. Inside the cramped cabin, the heartbeat of the radar pulsed to life, a steady hum mixed with the warm crackle of vacuum tubes, the glow of screens, and the soft whine of the rotating antenna. To the British technicians peering over the shoulders of the Americans, the interior of the SCR 584 looked almost alien. The displays were crisp, the controls precise, the electronic noise minimal. It felt less like wartime equipment and more like the future itself. When the radar finally powered up and began its first sweep, the operators leaned in, watching the screen with the same quiet anticipation as a soldier waiting for a shell to land. At first, there was nothing, just the soft curve of the ground return and faint atmospheric echoes. Then a blip appeared, small, distant, moving across the screen with faint but steady rhythm. The American operator smiled. "Aircraft," he said, and with a flick of a switch, he activated the auto-track system. The radar dish above them stopped its wide searching motion and began to follow the tiny blip automatically, smoothly, precisely, as if the target were tethered to the dish by some invisible thread. The British officers exchanged startled looks. They had never seen a radar lock onto a target without constant manual adjustment.
Most British sets required two operators to keep a single aircraft centered on the screen, but this machine did it alone, adjusting its aim hundreds of times per second. The American operator pointed at the screen. The target was a small reconnaissance aircraft flying at medium altitude, but the radar tracked it effortlessly, plotting its position, speed, and direction with accuracy that seemed almost unnatural. But the British were not yet convinced. Tracking a slow aircraft was one thing. Tracking a V-1 was something else entirely. The V-1 flew low, fast, erratic, hugging the landscape to evade detection and presenting a tiny radar cross-section. No radar in Britain had ever reliably tracked one from launch to interception. Even the advanced British sets wavered when the V-1 dipped suddenly or streaked past at incredible speed. But the Americans were ready to prove that the SCR 584 was built for exactly this challenge. They waited for a night when German forces launched a heavy barrage from Pas-de-Calais. The British warning system detected dozens of V-1s rising into the night, the drone of their pulse jet engines echoing faintly across the channel. Operators braced themselves, searchlights swiveled into position, artillery crews snapped to readiness, and radar stations strained to follow the incoming wave. The American crew powered up the SCR 584 and pointed the dish toward the horizon, waiting for the moment the V-1s crossed into range. The blips appeared suddenly, sharp and fast, climbing across the screen like sparks racing upward on a dark sheet. The British technicians tensed, their breath held. They knew how difficult these targets were. The radar beeped once, the operator flipped the switch, and the auto-track system locked on instantly. The dish above snapped to a precise angle, following the V-1 with smooth, unbroken movement. No jitter, no drop, no hesitation. The British stared, their disbelief almost audible. The target was moving at more than 600 kilometers per hour, low and fast, yet the radar tracked it as if it were floating motionless in a calm sky. The operator adjusted the controls, transferring the radar data to the M9 fire control computer. The numbers flowed from radar to computer to gun position in seconds, a continuous stream of coordinates describing every twist and surge of the V-1's flight path. The British officers realized with a jolt that this was something entirely new. The SCR 584 did not just detect the V-1, it understood it, it followed it, predicted it, held onto it with an electronic grip that the missile could not shake. For the German engineers who believed the V-1 flew too fast to be tracked, this moment would have been devastating. The machine they had designed to outrun guns was now being followed flawlessly by a radar that did not care about speed, did not panic at sudden dives, and did not blink for even a fraction of a second. As the first V-1 streaked closer, the radar tracked every meter of its approach, its position shifting across the screen with a clarity that made the British technicians whisper in astonishment. It was as if the V-1 were moving in slow motion, not because it was slow, but because the radar was so fast. The operator nodded, satisfied, ready to pass the data to the waiting gun crews. Beyond the horizon, the distant rumble of artillery began building, the defense line poised to fire the moment the radar gave the word. In that moment, the battle for London changed forever. Speed was no longer the advantage of the V-1, it was simply another number fed into the SCR 584's calculations. The vengeance weapon that had terrified a city was now illuminated on a screen held steady by a machine born from American science and British desperation. The German engineers had insisted the V-1 was too fast for human reaction, but the battle was no longer in human hands. It belonged to the radar, and the radar never hesitated, never blinked, never lost its target. The first engagement was moments away, and the skies over England were about to witness a new kind of war, one where machines sensed the enemy long before the enemy sensed them, and one where the V-1 would discover for the first time that it could not outrun the invisible eye locked onto it with perfect, unshakable precision.
The night sky over southern England trembled with the low mechanical howl of approaching V-1s, each one tearing through the darkness like a burning spear. The rumble grew louder, the pulse jet engines beating with an ugly rhythmic cough that seemed almost alive. On the ground, British and American anti-aircraft crews gripped their helmets, eyes turned upward, hands ready on firing controls. But this time, the outcome would be different. This time, the guns were not firing by instinct or guesswork. This time, they were no longer blind. The SCR 584 radar was watching every movement of the incoming missiles, tracking them with a precision that no human eye, no human hand had ever achieved. The operators inside the cramped radar cabin worked with calm urgency, their faces lit by the soft glow of oscilloscopes. The dish outside rotated smoothly, following the V1, locked in its invisible grip. The blip on the radar screen moved fast but steady, gliding across the circular display in a perfect arc. The operator called out data to the nearby fire control cabin, transferring coordinates to the M9 gun director. The M9 was the other half of the miracle, born from the mind of John von Neumann and the engineers who believed machines could solve calculations faster than any team of human gunners. The M9 took the radar inputs and turned them into firing solutions, adjusting range, elevation, and deflection for the 90mm anti-aircraft guns lined up behind earthen embankments. The whole system, radar, computer, gun, worked as one coherent machine, a single mind processing thousands of variables per second. Every gust of wind, every shift in speed, every dip in altitude of the V1 was translated instantly into corrected targeting data. The gun crews hardly had to think. Their guns moved automatically, powered by hydraulics, responding to the commands of a machine smarter, faster, and calmer than any human could ever be. The first V1 roared into the target zone, its engine buzzing violently, its short wings wobbling as it skimmed the treetops. The British gunners braced. The American radar men held their breath. The M9 director clicked into final position, and then the order came, a word spoken not with panic, but with certainty. Fire. The 90mm guns answered in perfect unison, the barrels recoiling, with thunder flashes of yellow and orange lighting the night sky. The shells streaked upward, guided not by the hope of a lucky hit, but by precise data. The shells carried a new secret weapon inside, the VT proximity fuse, a tiny marvel of American engineering that sensed a target's presence and detonated automatically when near it. No more guessing, no more timing, no more shells bursting too far behind the target. The VT fuse turned every round into a hunter, and the radar told it exactly where the prey was. The first shell passed close to the V1 and detonated. The explosion lit the night briefly, the blast wave struck the missile, its wings shuddered, and the V1 pitched left, its engine sputtering. Cheers erupted along the gun line, but the fight was not over. The second shell struck even closer, exploding right beneath the small metal fuselage. The shock tore through its frame, rupturing fuel lines and ripping open the thin steel skin. The V1 tumbled, its engine cutting out abruptly. The dreadful silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before the missile plummeted into an empty field and exploded. The ground shook, a fireball erupted, and a mushroom of dust and flame rose into the night sky. The gunners stared for a moment, stunned, and then they cheered. The radar crew exchanged determined nods. The system worked flawlessly. The impossible shot had been made possible not by luck, not by heroism, but by mathematics and electricity. The second V1 appeared on the radar screen, its blip bright, fast, and steady. The SCR 584 tracked it instantly, handing targeting data to the M9 computer. The guns adjusted again. The gunners watched the barrels shift smoothly, as if guided by an invisible hand. The order came. Fire. The guns roared a second time. Shells burst in the sky, small flashes visible to the naked eye. The VT fuses triggered at just the right distance, and a moment later, the V1 exploded mid-air. This one shattered into fragments, metal raining down harmlessly into fields beyond the gun line. British officers who had doubted the American radar stared in disbelief. They had never seen such accuracy, never seen a V1 treated like a target in a laboratory test. Even experienced gunners who had fought through years of night raids felt a chill. The SCR 584 had not simply helped the guns, it had transformed them from blunt instruments to precision tools. Over the next hour, more V1s raced toward the coast, and every one of them entered the kill zone governed by the SCR 584 and the M9 director. Each time the radar locked on, each time the guns responded within seconds, shells burst with eerie accuracy, and V1 after V1 fell from the sky in flames. It was as if the missiles were being swatted down effortlessly, handled like insects on a screen. The British began calling it the impossible shot,
Because before the SCR 584, no anti-aircraft battery in the world could reliably hit a target moving that fast, that low, at that angle. German engineers had built the VUN to outrun defenders, to make interceptors struggle, and to overwhelm anti-aircraft guns through sheer speed. They believed speed was all that mattered. But on this night, speed meant nothing. The radar saw through speed, saw through distance, saw through darkness, and produced firing solutions so accurate that the V1s might as well have been standing still. The news spread quickly through the gun belts and command posts. The Americans' radar tracks the V1 like it is nothing. The British passed the same words from crew to crew. The impossible had become routine. At dawn, the sky brightened, revealing blackened fields, scattered debris, and the twisted remains of half-destroyed V1s. The gun crews, exhausted but triumphant, looked across the horizon with a new sense of hope. They had not stopped the V1 campaign, not yet, but they had proven something vital. The V1 could be beaten, and not just occasionally, not by chance, but reliably, scientifically, methodically. The German engineers who believed their creation could outrun any gun would soon learn the truth. Speed was irrelevant when the enemy could see perfectly and react instantly. What mattered now was not the missile, but the radar that followed it with calm, mechanical precision. The SCR 584 had turned the impossible into routine, turned fear into confidence, turned chaos into calculation, and London would never again face the V1 defenseless. The battle had shifted. The defenders were no longer guessing, they were no longer hoping, they were no longer blind. With the SCR 584 guiding the guns, they now fought with perfect information. And in modern war, perfect information changes everything.
The summer of 1944 brought relentless waves of V1 flying bombs roaring across the English Channel night after night. The pulse-jet drones became an awful rhythm in the lives of Britons, a mechanical scream that made every window tremble, every child flinch, every adult listen with a tightening chest. People knew the pattern, the rising growl, then the cut of silence, then the explosion. But what they did not know was that far south of London, along the coast and countryside, a new kind of battlefield had formed. A battlefield built not of trenches or barbed wire, but of radar dishes, giant guns, and electronic mines working in perfect unison. This battlefield would be known as the anti-aircraft gun belt, but to those who fought there, it was simpler. They called it the Wall of Fire. After the success of the first SCR 584 guided engagements, British High Command made a bold decision. Artillery units were pulled back from the city and redeployed to open fields, clear lines of fire, and positions optimized for radar control. At first, civilians were alarmed. Moving the guns away from London seemed counterintuitive, like lifting a shield at the worst possible moment. But the calculations were clear. Hitting the V1 before it reached London was the only way to save the city, and the SCR 584 made it possible. The radar units were stationed in strategic clusters, each one commanding its own ring of 90mm guns. The large parabolic dishes rose from the ground like futuristic sentinels, their surfaces glinting under the summer sun. Cables ran in thick bundles across the mud, linking radar, fire control computers, generators, and gun emplacements. It looked chaotic from afar, but every single wire had purpose. Every angle was calculated. The operators inside the radar cabins felt the weight of the mission. The SCR 584 was not just a tool now, it was the central nervous system of London's survival. The British crews had grown adept with the strange American equipment, switching hitting scopes, adjusting frequencies, each motion smooth, practiced, confident. And around them, the gun crews waited, hands on ammunition loaders, ready to ram shells into chambers, gunners ready to watch the barrels dance under radar control. Moments before sunset, the V1 alarms began their mechanical howl, filling command centers across southern England. The radar screens flickered with movement, dozens of new blips rising from the direction of Pas-de-Calais, the German launch ramps spewing vengeance weapons into the twilight sky. The operators stiffened. The first wave was coming.
The SCR-584 crews swung their dishes toward the horizon. The auto-track system clicked into life, following the faint echoes as they appeared, blip by blip. Each V1 entered the radar coverage, passing from one dish to another, tracked with mathematical precision. Each one moving fast, low, aggressive, cutting across the sky. But the radar held every target without hesitation. The information flowed to the M9 computers, the guns adjusted automatically, and the wall of fire began. The first battery opened fire, bursting the evening air with thunderous roars. Shells ripped skyward, exploding around the incoming missiles. The VT proximity fuses, calibrated by radar guidance, detonated in perfect patterns, showering the sky with lethal fragments. One V1 caught a direct burst, its wings sheared off by shrapnel. It plunged into a farmland field, erupting into a cloud of smoke and flame. The gunners shouted, the adrenaline of victory filling them. But a second V1 streaked toward the city, then a third, then a fourth. The radar tracked each one. The guns responded in a rhythm that felt almost like music, a terrible mechanical symphony of data, calculations, explosions, and fire. From miles away, Londoners could sometimes see the flashes at the horizon, the faint stuttering lights of distant mid-air explosions. And though they did not yet know it, those sparks were their shield. The V1s that reached the gun belt flew into a slaughter. They came fast, but they died faster. The SCR-584 eliminated guesswork, eliminated fear, eliminated the chaos that had once made V1 so terrifying. Now they were just targets, mathematical problems to be solved, and the radar solved them ruthlessly. The kill rate began to rise sharply. British commanders watched the numbers with disbelief. In the early weeks before the SCR-584, the anti-aircraft guns shot down barely 17% of incoming V1s. Within days of full radar integration, the rate soared to 50%, then 60%, then 80%, then over 85%. Some batteries achieved even higher rates, with record-setting days where every V1 in their sector was destroyed. Gunners who once fired dozens of shells per kill now fired only a handful. The efficiency was staggering. Even German intelligence noticed the shift. Reports from the Channel coast carried grim notes from observers. Our missiles are destroyed in large numbers by new enemy methods. And though they did not yet know exactly what those methods were, they sensed something had changed, something profound, something that rendered speed meaningless, and the V1 campaign slowly began to lose its edge. The gun belt fought every night, sometimes for hours. The SCR-584 track operators barely blinked their eyes, following the glowing blips as the missiles screamed across the screens. Sweat on their brows, headphones pressed tight, listening for updates and confirmations. The gun crews grew exhausted, hands blistered, ears ringing from constant fire. But they kept going, because they knew every V1 they hit in the sky saved dozens of lives on the ground. At London suburbs, people heard the growing frequency of distant explosions in the countryside and realized something was happening, something good, something protective. Children slept easier. Mothers listened to the sky with a little less fear. Fathers no longer flinched as sharply when the pulse jet engines passed overhead. The city that had been terrorized for weeks slowly regained its composure because the wall of fire was doing its job. And as days passed and nights turned bloody with falling wreckage, German engineers began to receive compiled data from the front lines. The V1 was being shot down at unsustainable rates. Despite its speed, despite its unpredictability, despite every advantage they had built into the design. Still, the missiles fell, one after another, destroyed by a machine that did not care about their engineering pride. The SCR-584 track lines fed into British headquarters every day. Rows of neat columns showing kills, percentages, success rates, and performance logs. And in all of them, one truth grew clearer. The V1 campaign had been broken. not by courage, not by luck, but by precision, calculation, and radar. The British commanders visited the gun sites often, marveling at the smooth mechanical choreography, radar to computer to gun to explosion. Officers who weeks before had doubted the American technology now spoke of it with reverence, calling it the shield that saved London. By the end of July, the change was undeniable. The V1 remained dangerous, but its threat had been crippled. The wall of fire stood firm, a ring of defenders guided by an eye that never blinked, learned from every flight, and treated every missile the same. No panic, no fear, no hesitation. The SCR 584 had turned the tide, one blip at a time, and the capital of the British Empire survived, because no matter how fast the V1 flew, it could never outrun the radar that tracked it like it was nothing.
By August 1944, the terror that once swept through London with every rising drone of a V1 had begun to fade. The missiles still came, dozens, sometimes hundreds a day, but they no longer carved through the city with the same unchecked brutality. Instead, they cracked apart in the sky, burst into fragments over farmland, and vanished in distant blooms of fire. The reason was not a new fighter, not a new shell, not a new tactic. It was a machine, a radar dish that turned the tide of a technological war and left German engineers stunned. The SCR 584 had become the quiet hero of the English summer. It did not roar like a fighter, did not thunder like a gun, did not glide through the air like the V1 itself. Instead, it watched, it calculated, it predicted, and it destroyed without ever firing a single shot on its own. To the men who worked inside the cramped cabin lit by glowing scopes, the radar felt almost alive. They trusted it like a comrade, and spoke of it the way soldiers speak of a weapon that had saved their lives. It never blinked, never tired, never faltered. It simply followed the incoming missiles with unnatural calm. The gun crews loved it too, because it turned their batteries from blunt hope into precise instruments. The SCR 584 had become the heart of the gun belt, its pulse beating through cables and circuits, feeding data into the M9 computers and guiding the 90mm guns to impossible feats of accuracy. Before long, the results reached intelligence analysts in Germany. German engineers studying reports from the Western Front stared at the numbers in disbelief. Their miracle weapon, their pride, their vengeance missile was being shot down in staggering quantities. Their confidence shattered. One report from a German officer monitoring the campaign contained a short but devastating line. The enemy now destroys our flying bombs with scientific precision. No one could understand how British guns had become so deadly so quickly. Early war anti-aircraft accuracy had been unpredictable, uneven, and often inefficient, yet now the British shot down almost every missile that crossed their path. German scientists tried to dismiss it at first, claiming lucky conditions or exaggerated reports, but the numbers kept coming back from frontline observers, from intercepted communications, from spy networks. The evidence was overwhelming. The V1 designed to outrun defenses was being outmatched by a system that did not care how fast it flew. The turning point came during post-strike evaluations, when German technicians examining battlefield debris discovered consistent fragmentation patterns that suggested the missiles were being destroyed by proximity fuses triggered with perfect timing. The realization hit them hard. The British were not guessing anymore. During one internal briefing, a German engineer stood before his colleagues and stated plainly, "The V1 was built to outrun guns. It could not outrun radar." And that was the truth. Radar had been the unseen enemy inside every failure, the invisible adversary that robbed the V1 of its only real advantage, speed. Before the SCR 584, a V1 traveling 600 kilometers per hour was nearly impossible to hit. After the SCR 584, it might as well have been crawling across the sky. As the British kill rate soared above 85%, the V1 lost its terror edge. Entire flights of missiles were intercepted before even reaching London. The psychological pressure lifted, the fear softened. People stopped holding their breath every time the drone passed overhead. Britain had reclaimed the night, and it had done so through science. In command posts across southern England, analysts reviewed the data each morning, crisp sheets documenting kills, radar engagement times, firing solutions, and ammunition consumption patterns. And in every case, the numbers confirmed one thing: the future of warfare had changed forever.
Radar was no longer just a way to detect an enemy, it was a way to control the battlefield, to dictate the terms of the engagement, to turn guns into machines of mathematical certainty and enemies into predictable targets. The operators who had spent long nights inside radar cabins knew this better than anyone. Each V1 they tracked taught them something new. Each pattern of movement refined the technology. Each successful intercept proved that the battle belonged not to the fastest machine, but to the smartest one. After the liberation of France, British and American forces overran German launch sites and captured surviving V1 facilities. Engineers inspected the ramps, the assembly lines, the engines, the control systems, and they found what they expected. A weapon simple, effective, and terrifying in its purpose. But they also found the limits of its design. Speed without maneuverability. Altitude without variation. A predictable trajectory. Once the initial course was set, the V1 followed a steady path, perfect for radar prediction, perfect for the SCR 584 to exploit. After the war, historians interviewing German scientists recorded their shock. Many had believed the V1 campaign would cripple London, perhaps change the course of the conflict. But when asked when they realized the campaign was doomed, most responded the same way: when we learned about the American radar, the SCR 584. The SCR 584 was not flashy, it was not famous, it lacked the dramatic silhouette of the Spitfire or the romantic legend of fighter aces, but its impact was greater than any single aircraft. It changed the way nations defended themselves. It laid the groundwork for missile tracking systems, the foundation for Cold War defense networks, the birth of modern fire control and the dawn of electronic warfare technologies that would shape conflicts for decades. The radar that once tracked V1 flying bombs through the English night would evolve into systems that could track supersonic aircraft, ballistic missiles, and satellites. It was the ancestor of the radar shields that guard entire continents today, and it earned that legacy not through spectacle, but through precision, reliability, and unshakable accuracy. Near the end of the campaign, a British officer visited one of the gun sites where fragments of a V1 still smoldered in a nearby field. He watched the SCR 584 dish rotate slowly, settling back into its idle posture, its work done for the night. A gunner looked at the officer and said quietly, "We do not fear them anymore, sir. We see them before they see us." That simple sentence captured the essence of the radar revolution. The V1 was born from the belief that speed could conquer everything. But the STR 584 proved that speed meant nothing against an enemy that could watch every movement in real time, an enemy that understood the battlefield faster than a pilotless missile ever could. The radar did not just defend London, it humbled a weapon of terror. It stripped the vengeance weapon of its power, and in doing so, it marked the moment when wars stopped being fought only with steel and gunpowder and began to be fought with information, timing, and precision. And in that shift, the V1, the pride of German engineering, became nothing more than a bright blip on a radar screen, a target tracked effortlessly by a machine that treated it as if it was nothing at all.